Good morning. This is just a quick video to introduce you to the first section of Unit 1, which is an introduction to the human body. And here we'll just go over some of the main definitions, um, some of the terminology that's used to refer to different parts of the body, just a basic overview of what anatomy and physiology are referring to. Um, so a lot of this you can read in the Unit 1 module, and there's also some videos and some activities that I've included in there to help you learn these main ideas that are part of Unit 1. Also, you are expected to read the first few chapters of the book to help you understand this information. But hopefully this video will help explain some of the major concepts as well. So anatomy is really just the study of body structures, and it's obviously a very broad term. So there are subdisciplines of anatomy, the major ones being gross anatomy or macro anatomy, which is the study of structures that can be seen with the naked eye. So things that are big enough for you to be able to see without using a microscope. And then there's microanatomy, which is the study of structures that are too small to be seen with the naked eye. This would include things like tissues and cells. And physiology is the study of how various body structures function, how they work with each other to perform a function. And there are also subdisciplines of physiology, like neurophysiology, refers to how the nervous system functions, like, for instance, how nerve impulses are sent through the body for communication. And then the body is organized from small structures all the way up to an entire organism, which is a living individual. And you can see here, it starts with the chemical level of atoms. If you put a couple atoms together, that creates a molecule. And then many molecules put together would lead to an entire cell. And then if you put multiple cells together, that creates a tissue. So these cells are working together to perform a function. For example, if you have one smooth muscle cell, you combine it with many other smooth muscle cells, that creates muscle tissue. Then several tissues together that perform a common function, that is an organ, that forms an organ. So it's multiple tissue types. In this case, there's muscle tissue, there's connective tissue, and there's epithelial tissue. And together they form a blood vessel, which is an organ. Multiple organs form an organ system. And these organs all work together to perform the function of the organ system. And there's many organ systems in the body. There's the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system. We'll go through those in just a minute. And then finally, an organism is made up of many organ systems put together. So these are the major organ systems of the body, and you have a chart that is part of the Unit 1 module that you can fill in with the functions of each organ system. So we have the integumentary system, which is the skin, and the accessory structures associated with the skin, like hair, nails, and glands. The skeletal system is all the bones in the body, plus joints, which is where two bones come together, and also cartilage. Muscular system is composed of skeletal muscles. These are the muscles that are attached to the skeleton. There's actually other types of muscles as well, but muscular system only consists of skeletal muscles. The nervous system is one of the major controlling systems of the body. It's responsible for communication, all kinds of things. We'll discuss that in a little while. And nervous system is composed of the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and then all the nerves throughout the body, plus receptors that are located throughout the body that detect any kind of changes. Endocrine system is the other main controlling system of the body. It regulates a lot of different body functions, and it's also responsible for communication, just like the nervous system. Cardiovascular system is the heart, blood vessels, and blood. The lymphatic system is closely associated with the immune system, so often we discuss those together at the same time. The respiratory system, that's responsible for bringing air in and out of the body, responsible for gas exchange. The digestive system, you can see a lot of the organs that are involved with that system. Urinary system, so it's the kidneys are the major organs that are responsible for the functions of the urinary system, and then these other structures just either store or carry urine. And reproductive systems, the structures are a little bit different depending on whether you're looking at a male or female. Okay, and then in the Unit 1 module, you can read through the processes that are essential for maintaining life, and you can read the brief descriptions that I've included for each of those things. And then just basic survival needs. There's really just 5 major things that are required to sustain life. And that's nutrients, which are required for energy and for building new cells. Also oxygen, water, maintaining a normal body temperature. So for us, it's about 98.6 degrees. And then maintaining the appropriate atmospheric pressure, which allows for gas exchange. Okay. Also, it's important to know the main fluid compartments within the body. So these circular structures represent cells. The fluid inside of your cells is called intracellular fluid because it's found inside of the cells. Fluid that is found outside of cells is called extracellular fluid. And those 2 fluid compartments are kept separate. There is a boundary surrounding each one of your cells. It's called the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, and that separates the cell's internal environment from the external environment. All right, here's a really important term that's associated with physiology. Homeostasis is your body's ability to maintain a pretty stable environment internally, despite the changes that are occurring outside of the body. So for instance, the body always maintains within a few degrees, but it always maintains like a constant internal temperature, no matter what the temperature is outside the body. So if you go outside on a really cold, like a freezing cold day, your body is still able to maintain its normal body temperature, even though the temperature outside of the body is very low. So that's important for maintaining life. And the way that homeostasis is maintained and all these necessary conditions like a stable internal temperature and the ideal atmospheric pressure, the way all of these conditions are maintained is through a feedback mechanism. There are 3 components involved in a feedback mechanism. A receptor is what monitors all of the conditions inside of your body. So you have receptors that are monitoring blood pressure, body temperature, oxygen levels, everything. Then you have a control center. So the receptors will report any kinds of changes to the control center. The control center is your central nervous system, usually your brain, sometimes the spinal cord. And the control center will determine what the appropriate response is and send that information to an effector. And the effector is the structure that performs the appropriate response. There are 2 types of feedback mechanisms, and the one that is used 99% of the time is negative feedback. So with negative feedback, that's when the body's response goes in the opposite direction as the initial change. So this is typically the only thing that makes sense. If the initial change in the body is increasing blood pressure. So just to kind of set the stage for that, your body has an ideal blood pressure that it always is maintaining. And that blood pressure is usually somewhere around 120/80. And if blood pressure starts increasing, so maybe it's going from 120 to 125 to 130, that is going to be detected by a receptor. That receptor is going to report that change to your body's control center. And then the control center is going to determine the appropriate response and send that information to an effector. The effector is going to perform the response, which is going to bring your body's blood pressure back to normal. So if the initial change was that blood pressure is increasing, the only response that makes sense to bring blood pressure back to normal would be to decrease blood pressure. So that is a response that's moving in the opposite direction from the initial change. The initial change was increasing, the response is decreasing. So it's going to bring blood pressure back down to that normal value of 120/80. So typically that, like I said, that's the only thing that really makes sense. Another example would be with body temperature. If you go outside on a really cold day and your body temperature starts out at 98 degrees, but then it starts dropping, going from 98 to 97, 96, 95, that is definitely going to be detected by a receptor. It's going to report that information to the control center, and the control center is going to tell an effector in the body how to correct that change. So think about it. If your body temperature is decreasing, what is the response that makes sense? It is to increase it, bring body temperature back up to 98 degrees. So to go back up from 95 to go to 96, 97, and all the way up to 98. That is the only response that really makes sense. So that's how negative feedback works. Positive feedback is only used in a few rare situations. An example would be with blood clotting. Another is during childbirth, where instead of the response being in the opposite direction of the initial change, it goes in the same direction. So normally, if you think about it, that would be harmful. Like with my blood pressure example or temperature example, if blood pressure is increasing and the body's response is to increase it even more, that's just going to cause more harm. Same thing with body temperature. If body temperature is decreasing, if your body uses a positive feedback mechanism, it's going to decrease body temperature even more. That's going to cause more and more harm. So typically that doesn't make sense. Usually that is not what is used to regulate all of these different conditions in the body. Okay, so some of the terminology related to the body, I'm not going to go through every single term because you guys have all this in your textbook, but I do want to introduce anatomical position in order to describe where body parts are, where an injury might be on the body. We always assume that an individual is in anatomical position. So that is when they're in or meeting the following conditions. They're standing upright, they're standing straight, facing forward, arms are at their sides. You can see palms are forward, legs are together, feet are flat on the floor and pointing forward. So on here, and this comes right from your textbook, this shows you on the anterior side of the body and then on the posterior side of the body, all the major regional terms of the body. So instead of saying like the wrist area, we would refer to that as carpal. That's the carpal region. Instead of saying the chest region, you would say thoracic. So these are the terms that are used to refer to different regions of the body. Also, we use these directional terms to describe where body parts are in relation to one another. And you can read these definitions and explanations right in the text. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to describe these. But definitely ones that are commonly used are anterior and posterior. So anterior means towards the front of the body, posterior means toward the back. We also see a lot, medial means toward the middle or toward the midline of the body, which is this imaginary line that goes right through the middle of the body. So medial means towards the middle, towards the midline. Lateral means off to the side. Okay. Also, so planes, these are imaginary, basically imaginary lines that divide the body into different sections. So you can read about the three main planes that can divide the body. There's two vertical planes, frontal and sagittal. And then the transverse plane is horizontal. So it cuts the body horizontally. And then the major body cavities, which contain the major internal organs. So the two main divisions are dorsal and ventral. The dorsal cavity is in yellow, ventral cavity is shown in red. And then there are a few subdivisions. So know these subdivisions and also know the major organs that are contained within each one. So this tells you that. This shows the cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity or spinal cavity and what each one of those contains. And then here we have the thoracic cavity. That's the most superior part of the ventral cavity. And then the diaphragm is what separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominopelvic cavity. I'm going to go to the next picture so you can see this a little bit more clearly. So here's the diaphragm. The thoracic cavity is divided into a few more subdivisions. There are the two pleural cavities, which contain the lungs, and the pericardial cavity, which contains the heart. And then here, this entire thing is the abdominopelvic cavity, separated into abdominal and pelvic cavities. And you can see the organs that are contained within each section there. And then the abdominopelvic cavity is further subdivided into 9 regions, just to, because that cavity is pretty large. So if you say that an organ is found in the abdominopelvic cavity, that's a huge area. So this further subdivides that large cavity into distinct regions so that you can just be a little bit more specific about the exact location of a structure, an organ, or an injury. Okay, so I will stop there with that section and just please go through the book and those charts that I provided you with the major body systems, regional terms, and directional terms, and fill those in. Make sure you know the definitions for those. All right, thank you.